He saved the woman stung by a scorpion. At first, it was only mercy, an act of instinct by a man who refused to walk away. But days later, that single moment of courage drew out something far sharper than venom itself. The hard proposal of a father bound more tightly by honor than by love. Amara had fallen in the dust, her young body writhing under the fire of poison burning through her veins. Her own people recoiled at the sight. Rather than lift her, they stepped back, muttering words of ancient curses and ill omens, as if she'd swallowed not venom, but doom. Fear is a powerful shield for the heartless. They left her there to wither as if her life was already traded for safety. But one man bent down. Cato, a stranger. A wanderer living quietly outside their walls. He had less than most men. No lineage, no wealth, no name passed down with respect. Yet he refused to let her die unguarded. With neither hesitation nor calculation, he sealed his lips on a wound no one else would touch, drew out the poison, spat it onto the ground, and gathered her fragile weight against his chest. Then, step by steady step, he carried her to his small home, though the eyes of the village burned against his neck, whispering even then, "No one risks breath and blood for nothing. He will claim some price." What Cato didn't know was that his compassion, instead of planting gratitude, would be twisted into suspicion, until even the father of the girl he saved would walk back to his door not bearing thanks, but a proposal that shackled both their fates. That first night dragged like a test of spirit. In Cato's dim hut, flames popped and sighed in the hearth, painting amber scars across the clay walls. Amara lay weak on the mat, every inch of her skin drenched in sweat. Her breathing rose and broke in soft cries, thin and vulnerable. Cato hovered constantly, cloth in hand, pressing it to her brow, replacing it again and again as fever boiled. His movements were quiet, careful, almost ceremonial, as if he wasn't merely tending a wound, but cradling a whole life. Scorpion venom was a sly adversary. It feigned retreat, then returned in cruel waves, trickling fire through bone and muscle. Each time Amara's body stiffened, each time her hands clenched, Cato fetched more water, bathed her temples, knelt low and whispered words stripped of grandeur yet wrapped in soul. Breathe, fight, stay. They sounded like simple encouragements, but between his teeth they were prayers, raw and unadorned. Meanwhile, the village did not rest. Huddled beyond his walls, voices rustled like snakes in the grass. Firelight flickered against faces leaning close to trade suspicions. "What man risks venom for a girl he scarcely knows?" hissed one elder with bitter lips. An older woman spat phlegm into the dirt. "Kindness that tastes too costly turns sour. Mark me, he doesn't save her for free." The words dripped like poison from one mouth to another, not killing bodies but eroding reputations. Their venom was heavier than the scorpion's, slow, corrosive, born of envy, fear, and the stubborn need to believe that no light in men exists without shadow. Cato heard fragments of this black chorus through the cracks in his walls. He didn't answer. He did not open his door or raise his voice above them. Instead, his eyes stayed fixed on Amara, firm as an oath. He had no coin to buy respect, no history to shield him from contempt. All he owned were his rough hands and a will planted deep against cruelty. That was enough. He let silence be his defense, care be his only argument, and so the hours pooled like tar. Firelight thinned as night stretched endless. Between wood shrinking into ash and the girl's fevered moans, time seemed suspended. One destiny balanced on the thin wire of her pulse, the other anchored in his decision to resist despair. At last, in the gray breath of morning, Amara opened her eyes. Though clouded with fever, they glimmered with a spark refusing to die. Cato leaned close, knelt beside her, and held out his calloused hand. He did not call for witnesses, did not shout his triumph into the streets. He spoke only, "You're alive, and you will stand again." Her lips quivered, unable to shape words, but a single tear rolled down her cheek. A droplet spun from both agony and relief. To Cato, it meant life persisted. To her, it meant she was not wholly abandoned. To the neighbor who spied through a slit of the half-open window, it meant something else entirely. Hope twisted itself, in that secret glance, into evidence of sin. By nightfall, tongues would make a noose out of that glimpse. Before long, a group of men swelled at his threshold. Their sandals ground dust. Their faces gathered into a single mask of suspicion. One, the eldest, barked, "Stranger, what do you demand? Speak now. None among us believes in gifts without a hand stretched in return." Wiping the sweat from his brow, Cato rose, meeting their gazes level. He answered plainly, his voice steady as the earth under them. "I want nothing. I want only to see her walk again." His words fell into silence, echoing like stones dropped into a bottomless well. No reply, just watching eyes, some sneering, some wary, none convinced. In their world, kindness was a stolen mask. Sincerity was not a currency they believed existed. From that seed of mistrust arose a new venom, far subtler than the scorpion's sting. Slander. Women whose eyes had not seen claimed they had. Men who had never entered his hut repeated tales as though they stood at his side. The good was unfit to stand alone, so it was twisted, reshaped into cruelty, until nothing selfless remained. Amara, still fragile, could hear the poisoned words outside, striking through mud walls like arrows. Each lie pierced deeper than the sting in her veins. She wept not from fever, but from the way her life had become a tale embroidered in other people's mouths. Cato held his ground. Like a rooted tree battered by storm, he neither bent nor broke. His task was not to untangle villagers' gossip, nor to cleanse his name in their sight. His only vow was the girl herself, to guard the flame of life flickering in her, as though it were fire carried on fragile straw. By dawn, the word had spread. Amara was alive. Shock rippled through some. It was said the scorpion's bite gave no mercy. Others muttered with cruel smirks. If she survived, it must have cost her pride. Whispers were barter. Each man and woman paid with them. Yet no one bristled more than Baraka, Amara's father. A man of deep lines, deep suspicion, and deeper pride. An unbending wall. What bound his heart wasn't relief at his daughter's survival, but the scorching whispers staining his name. For him, honor weighed heavier than her breath. That same day, his shadow fell across Cato's door. He gave no knock, only the crash of the wooden hinge as he stormed inside. Amara stirred feebly on her mat, tried to rise, but her body betrayed her. Cato, seated at her side, stood with the same calm that had carried him through the night of fevers. Baraka's eyes, carved into stone, scanned the space as if searching not for life, but for proof of violation. His voice struck like an axe. He who dares touch my daughter dares touch my honor. His glare burned not on his daughter's pallor, nor her weak breath, but on the imagined crime hung on Cato's shoulders. Amara summoned a whisper. "Father." He saved, but the raised hand silenced her, cutting her voice at the root. Silence, he declared, was her shield. The silence pierced her deeper than words, for in it she understood her father's protection was not for her, but for himself. Cato braced himself, steady. "I did nothing except save her life. I sought no reward. I asked no return. I did what a man should." But words forged from truth sounded to Baraka like mockery. He stepped forward, voice rising. "Don't paint yourself noble, outsider. No man acts without desire. If my daughter welcomed your boldness, it is she who will bear the stain." The air inside grew heavier. Outside, villagers pressed closer, their hunger for spectacle dragging them nearer, their ears wide to every word. Rumors spread before mouths closed. Carried like sparks on wind, Amara trembled, weak, tears sliding, her soul breaking more under her father's blindness than under venom's torment. Baraka's roar struck like iron. "So long as I live, none will laugh at my name. I would sooner see my daughter buried by my hand than claim a shame upon this house." His words fell like stones in a crowd, hard, cold, unmoving. Yet a few at the door flinched. Even among those woven tight in tradition, a line had been crossed. They felt how honor, when piled too heavily, no longer shields, it crushes. Cato's voice did not waver. "If your village believes life itself is shame, then place that shame upon me, and I will bear it. But know this, your daughter breathes because one man met the poison that all others fled. If this counts for nothing, then may God alone be my witness." Baraka's chest swelled, rage twisting inside him, yet no reply came. In the folds of his pride, the thorn of truth pressed too deep to deny. Still he would not admit it. With fury boiling his silence, he turned and stormed out, slamming wood against clay so hard it rattled the roof. Behind him he left Amara, in tears, more broken than before, and the stranger who had risked his life for her, repaid with suspicion and rage. In that moment, two truths crystallized. Amara saw that her danger had not ended with the scorpion's bite, but lay deeper in her father's fury. And Cato saw that kindness, instead of bringing gratitude, had birthed the hatred of a man who confused control for respect. And thus, on that morning marked by tears and fury, the lines were drawn sharp, a battle between the steady truth of a humble heart and the crushing pride of a father unable to see beyond his honor. Several days had passed since the scorpion's venom had been drawn from Amar's body, still fragile, her legs trembling with the slightest effort. She decided to accompany her mother to the village market. It was a clear Saturday, the blue sky shining over the palm trees, and the dust rose from the ground under the hurried steps of men and women trading corn for beans, fabric for oil, eggs for salt. Amara walked slowly, covered by a simple scarf, but not even the cloth could hide the weight in her eyes. The fear of being seen, the fear of what people might say. The market was the heart of the village. Everything that was said, everything that spread was born there among cassava stands and fruit baskets. No sooner had Amara stepped into the open space than she felt the stares pierce her skin. They weren't looks of joy for seeing her live. They were looks of judgment. Just behind her she heard two women whisper, she was saved. But at what cost? Another, arranging pumpkins on her stall, muttered to a neighbor, no man risks his life like that for nothing. Something happened in that house. Amara clutched the small basket of vegetables to her chest as if she could hide inside it. Her mother, sensing her discomfort, tried to walk faster, but every movement was followed by whispers, stifled giggles, fingers discreetly pointing. Even the children, repeating what they heard at home, pulled away from her as if she carried an invisible curse. A small girl, tugged along by her mother, asked aloud, is it true the scorpion didn't kill her because she already had poison inside? The comment struck like an arrow straight through Amara's heart. She wanted to respond, wanted to scream, but her throat dried up. Silence was her only defense, the same silence her father had imposed days earlier. Each step through the market became a burden, where once she was known for her shy smile and honest work beside her mother. Now she was remembered only as the subject of gossip. It was as if her life had been traded for public shame. Across the square, Cato appeared, carrying a sack of corn on his shoulders. He was there to trade the little he'd earned from days of labor, when he saw Amara being targeted by stares and whispers. His eyes filled with concern. He took a few steps toward her but stopped. Heck knew that any gesture would be seen as proof of what they were already making up. His silence, too, had become a shield, though a painful one. Amara, noticing his presence, felt her chest tighten. Part of her wanted to run to him and thank him out loud for giving her life back. But the weight of the village held her frozen. She didn't want to give more fuel to the sharp tongues that were already tearing her apart without mercy. She simply lowered her gaze and walked on, feeling his presence like a protective shadow in the distance. The greatest humiliation came as they passed the fabric stall. The vendor, pretending to choose her words, said in a voice loud enough for all to hear, some women are lucky to be saved. Others live with the disgrace of owing their lives to those they shouldn't. Muted laughter echoed around them. Amara's face burned with shame. Her mother, holding back tears, grabbed her arm and said only, let's go. That day, Amara understood that surviving was not the same as living. She had escaped death by scorpion, but now faced a slower, crueler death, a social one. Thanesek's venom had been removed from her body, but the venom of words still flowed through the village, seeping deep into her soul. And it was in that suffocating environment that the young woman began to realize the life that had been given back to her would come with a new battle, not against creatures of the forest, but against the tongues of men sharper than any sting. The following days were heavy for Amara. She stayed inside most of the time, avoiding the village square and the suspicious eyes of the neighbors. With every whisper that reached her ears, her heart tightened as if she were guilty of a crime she had never committed. Her mother tried to console her, saying, daughter, time will dull those sharp tongues. But time, instead of dulling them, seemed only to sharpen the village's cruel words. Her father paced the yard with a dark expression. I couldn't stand the hidden laughter of the men at the market, nor the women's malicious into him. His honor was being trampled, and in his hardened mind, there was only one way out: to turn shame into transaction, to turn what the village called dishonor into a definitive arrangement. On a stifling afternoon, he summoned Cato to the yard. The young laborer, surprised by the invitation, walked toward Baraka's house with steady steps, though he knew he wouldn't be welcomed. Upon arrival, he found Amara's father sitting on a wooden bench, arms crossed, eyes as hard as stone. Amara was nearby, silent, her gaze fixed on the ground. Baraka wasted no time on pleasantries. His voice came out sharp as a blade. If you want to erase the dishonor you've brought upon my name, then marry my daughter. That way, the whispers will stop and the shame will be transformed into family ties. The words struck Amara's heart like thunder. Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't dare protest. She felt like a coin exchanged at a market, not for love, but for convenience. Silence wrapped around her like an invisible prison. Inside, she screamed, I never lost my honor, never gave anything to anyone. So why am I being traded like merchandise? But her mouth stayed shut. She already knew her voice held no weight against her father's rigidity. Kato lowered his head for a moment, not in agreement, but in understanding. He saw the pain in Amar's eyes, the pain of being reduced to a bargaining chip. He also saw in Baraka's face the blind fury of a man more concerned with village gossip than with his own daughter. Amara remained still, but a storm raged inside her. She still carried in her chest the memory of Nero, the young man she had loved in silence. But truly, Nuru had left without saying goodbye, taken by life's demands. But this name still burned in her heart, and now faced with the proposal of a forced marriage, all she could do was swallow her tears and remain silent, just as so many women before her had done. Baraka, seeing their silence, took it as acceptance. His tone softened slightly, though no less harsh. "I don't want more talking. I want swift answers. All our fates are at stake." To him, honor was like a broken pot. The only way to mend it was by forcing the shards together. Even if the cracks remained visible, Kato took a deep breath but gave no answer. Then he knew any rushed word would be unfair to Amara. A heavy silence settled over them all until Baraka stood, striking his staff against the ground. "Think well, outsider. I won't let my daughter live under ridicule. If you saved her, then you must own the life she has left." That night, Amara wept alone by the edge of the river that ran near the village. The water reflected the full moon, but Hiri's reflected only sorrow. "I was saved only to be sold," she murmured, her voice choked by pain. The wind seemed to carry her words far away, as if the skies were the only ones willing to hear her. Meanwhile, Kato returned to his hut, carrying the weight of a decision forced upon him. He hadn't asked for anything, hadn't sought marriage. He had only done what he believed was right, save a life. Now in front of the entire village, he was accused of claiming things he had never wanted. The kindness he had shown was starting to turn into a trap. And so on that afternoon, marked by held-back tears and harsh words, Baraka's unexpected proposal was born. A proposal with no love, no joy, only an attempt to erase shame with invisible chains. A proposal that without anyone realizing it would soon ignite an even greater fire in the village. The fire of judgment, division, and the courage that would soon be demanded of everyone. Baraka's proposal spread through the village like fire in dry straw. Some said the marriage would fix everything, that it would cleanse the dishonor and put an end to the whispers. Others, however, murmured under their breath that it was nothing more than a disguised punishment, a sentence imposed on a young woman who had done nothing but survive. The village was divided, and at the center of it all was Amara's silence. A silence heavier than 1,000 words dot in circles of elders. The men shook their heads and repeated the old proverb, "Better a daughter married without joy than one spoken of without respect." That was how they justified the arrangement. To them, the reputation of a family was worth more than a woman's feelings. But in the kitchens, on the riverbanks, among the women washing clothes and grinding corn, other voices rose quietly but firmly. This isn't marriage, it's punishment. It's selling a daughter in the name of an honor that was never lost. Amara heard these words from a distance. She didn't have the strength to speak out in public, but inside her, a storm was brewing. A mix of anger and courage. Every whisper, every judgment, every piece of advice given in the name of tradition showed her that to many, her life was just a token to be exchanged. Yet there were also those who looked at her with silent compassion, recognizing that she was the victim of an injustice dressed up as custom. Kato in turn walked through the village under heavy eyes. He was no longer just the outsider who had sucked the venom from a scorpion. Now he was the man accused of trying to take advantage of the situation. When asked what he would do, he always gave the same reply: "I need time to think." A life isn't decided the way one sets the price of a chicken. But that answer pleased no one. To some it was a sign of cowardice, to others merely an excuse to gain more influence. Kato's silence was much like Pamara's. Neither of them accepted the idea of a forced marriage, but both knew that speaking out against Baraka in public could bring terrible consequences. So they endured in silence, each waiting for the right moment to speak their truth. That silence began to disturb the community even more, because where there are no words, rumors take root. One night, the village square filled with voices. Some defended the father. He just wants to protect his family's name. Others criticized protection isn't done with chains. He wants to trap his daughter in a lie. Even the elders, soused to repeating traditions without question, began to disagree among themselves. For the first time in a long while, the village was divided not over land disputes or harvests, but over the honor of a woman and the freedom of a man who had asked for nothing in return. Amara, hidden behind the window, listened to the chaos like someone hearing a verdict that felt already written, yet still not brave enough to be spoken aloud. She felt torn between silent gratitude for Kaido and the crushing weight of her father's authority. Her heart told her that marrying under pressure would be a prison. but her mind feared the storm Baraka might unleash upon her. Meanwhile, Cato stood firm in his decision to wait. I won't rush to answer, he told himself, because if I speak without thinking, I serve neither myself nor her, nor the truth. Yet insolence was seen by many as defiance. Each day without a response only further inflamed the village. And so between whispers and open arguments, the village grew more divided. Amara's silence, Cato's silence, and even Baraka's silence, so full of pride, turned into voiceless screams echoing through every corner. It was as if everyone was waiting for a decision that never came. And in that void, each person wrote their own version of the story. At that point, all paths in the village led to the same conclusion. The confrontation could no longer be avoided. Silence, once heavy and full of meaning, had become a weapon. And fate, quietly, was preparing the moment when words and actions would crash together like lightning striking dry earth. Amara's night had grown long and heavy. While the village debated her fate, she remained silent inside the small mud house, staring at the faint lamplight dancing against the wall. But deep in her heart, one name still burned like an ember. Nuru. Nuru had been her first love. Back in the days when youth felt like an endless road, he was a restless, dream-filled boy who often spoke of distant lands, of life beyond the hills that surrounded Kibora. Amara remembered his words spoken beneath the shade of the mango tree. One day I'll leave not because I don't love you, but because I need to find what the world holds for me. And so he had left without saying goodbye, leaving behind only the echo of a promise and the ache of absence. It was that emptiness that now weighed even more, because in the face of Baraka's forced proposal, she felt as if they were taking not just her freedom, but also the memory of the love she still held. Her father knew the story. He knew his daughter still dreamed of Nuru, and that was why he rushed to arrange a marriage. To Baraka, Amara's heart was just another obstacle to control. Feelings to him held no weight beside honor. One early morning, unable to bear the suffocating walls of her home, Amara walked to the riverbank. The cold night wind stirred the dark waters, and the stars above reflected like watchful eyes. She sat on a rock and let her tears flow freely. She whispered softly, as if speaking to Nuru himself, even knowing he wouldn't hear. I was saved only to be sold. What kind of fate is this? My God, what's the point of living if I can't choose who I live with? The tears fell without comfort. The river seemed to carry her words away. But inside her, something new began to grow. A mixture of pain and strength. She didn't want to be a bargaining chip. She didn't want to be remembered only as Baraka's daughter, but as a woman with a voice and a truth. Still, the shadow of fear hung heavy on her shoulders. Her father was unyielding, the village divided, and her own voice felt small beside so many sharp tongues, while Amara wept by the river. Kato also kept vigilant silence inside his hut. He thought about Baraka's proposal, about the whispers, but above all, he thought about Armora. He didn't see her as a debt, nor as an honor to be redeemed. To him, she was simply a life saved, a life that deserved to blossom freely. And though he had yet to speak his position aloud, he already knew deep within he would never accept turning his kindness into possession. The next morning, returning from the river with her eyes red, Amara crossed paths with a few women who watched her from afar. One of them said in a low but audible tone, "There goes the girl who was saved, but now her father tries to sell her as a solution." Another added, "If only she had the courage to speak, maybe the story would be different." Those words, though harsh, sparked an unexpected flame inside Amara. Perhaps it truly was time to find her own voice. But for now, the memory of Nuru remained her only strength. In dreams, she still saw him returning down the dirt road, wearing the same smile as before. But she always woke up alone, the weight of reality heavier than any dream, and this contradiction consumed her, caught between a past that wouldn't return and a future others tried to force upon her. Her life felt suspended like a leaf, adrift with no clear direction. And so in the solitude of her heart and the silence of a divided village, Amara carried her memory as both burden and shield. Because even if she couldn't yet speak aloud, inside her still lived a love that reminded her of who she truly was. And it was that memory, that unextinguished feeling that was beginning to give her the courage to face the storm that was drawing near. Days passed, and the pressure in the village only grew. Baraka paced back and forth, demanding an answer from Cato. The elders were now openly debating the forced marriage, and the women's whispers had turned into accusations spoken without shame. Amara remained silent, but inside her soul was screaming. Then one afternoon, with the sun burning high in the sky, and the roosters crowing as if announcing something new, Cato made a decision. He went to Baraka's house, not empty-handed, but carrying a clay pot carefully crafted. It was simple, made by his own hands, shaped during the sleepless nights he had spent thinking. When he arrived, he found Armora and her mother sweeping the yard, while Baraka sat in the shade, his gaze still as hard as stone. The neighbors quickly gathered, everyone eager to see whether the outsider had finally accepted the proposal. Cato set the pot down before them and spoke clearly so that all could hear. I did not come to ask for a wife. I came to return life. What I saved does not belong to me. Life belongs to the one who carries it, not to the one who rescues it. His words thundered through the afternoon air. The village, so used to seeing kindness turned into debt, didn't know how to react. Some muttered that he was mocking Amora's father. Others stood silent, moved by a truth they didn't dare challenge. The pot sitting on the ground symbolized something greater. It was proof that Cato sought no wealth, no status, no woman in return for what he'd done. He had given life back just as a potter returns form to clay. For the first time since the day of the scorpion, Amara lifted her eyes in public. She looked straight at Cato, and in that moment, a timid smile formed on her lips. It was brief, almost hidden, but carried the strength of a dammed up river, finally breaking free. To her, the gesture was more than a rejection of forced marriage. It was a silent declaration of respect, an acknowledgement of her dignity. Baraka, however, could not bear the scene. His face grew even harder, as if the pot before him were an insult. He muttered, through clenched teeth, "A man who rejects the honor I offer is not worthy to live among us." But even in his fury, he could not hide his unease, because deep down he knew Cato's words rang with truth. The people gathered around began to whisper. Some of the women who had once judged Amara now quietly said, "He speaks with truth. One who saves should not take ownership. He should be remembered." One of the elders, who until then had supported Bar, stroked his beard and admitted, "I've never seen a man so bold as to reject what many would see as a reward." The village was divided once again, but something had changed. For the first time, Amara's dignity was being defended in public, not as dishonor, but as a right. That night, as the villagers dispersed, Amara felt a new flame ignite within her. She was no longer entirely alone. There was at least one man willing to face blind tradition in the name of truth. The clay pot remained in the yard, a silent witness to an unexpected act that would change the course of their lives. And so before everyone, Cato showed that true courage wasn't in sucking venom from a scorpion, but in rejecting the invisible poison of unjust convention. His simple gesture, full of truth, opened the path for Amora's voice, once stifled, to begin finding its space. Because sometimes all it takes is one unexpected act to break the oldest chains. Cato's gesture echoed through the village like a drumbeat struck in the dead of night. Unexpected, loud, and impossible to ignore. To publicly refuse the marriage. To return life without asking for anything in return. And to boldly say before all that saving someone does not grant ownership over their existence. It all struck Baraka as an act of defiance. The father's pride, already wounded by gossip, now burned like an open wound in front of the entire community. That same night, Baraka's yard seemed to smolder in silence. The moon cast its pale light over the mud walls, and Amara, leaning against the doorway, stared at the clay pot Cato had left to her. The object was a symbol of freedom. To Baraka it was an insult. He entered the house with heavy steps, and his voice cracked through the air like thunder. The scorpion's venom wasn't enough. Now this outsider brings an even worse poison, the poison of dishonor. He humiliated me before everyone, and you, my daughter, dared to smile at him in front of the village. For the first time, Amara lifted her face with resolve. Her voice, once frail, came out clear and steady. "Smiling is not a crime, Father, and if Ismaeled, it was because I saw respect in his eyes, something I never found in the village whispers, nor in your voice when you accused me." Her words landed like arrows in Baraka's chest to be confronted by his own daughter in the very thing he feared most. The loss of authority left him humiliated. He roared like a storm. "Silence. I'd rather see you die in this house than live under the shadow of this shame. Tomorrow I will drive that man from the village. And you, if you dare cross that door, I'll lock you in here until you learn that honor is not something to be negotiated." But Amara did not back down. The girl who had long suffered in silence had found her voice. Tears ran down her face, but her mouth did not waver. "I prefer shame with truth to honor bought with lies. I will not be sold like cattle. I will not be punished for surviving." And as always, the village heard, for mud walls do not hold back, words shouted with such force. Neighbors drew closer, and soon the square filled with curious onlookers, drawn by Baraka's fury and his daughter's courage. Men and women looked at each other, some horrified by Amora's boldness, others surprised by the strength of someone who had remained silent for so long. Seeing the crowd gather, felt his pride wounded even more. "Let all here be witnesses," he shouted. "My daughter disrespects me." This man insults me, and my house is spat on with shame. Let the outsider be cast out, and this girl locked away until she learns the weight of honor." Then Cato stepped forward from the shadows of the square. He brought no weapons, made no threats, only his steady voice. "If your honor depends on imprisoning your daughter, then your honor is worth nothing. If you cast me out, I will leave with my head held high, but I will not stand by while her freedom is crushed by your pride." Silence fell on everyone. Baraka's breathing was heavy, his fists clenched, his eyes burning, but something inside him faltered. The people were there, hearing every word, and the weight of the community was no longer fully on his side. Amara, standing firm, raised her voice again. "I am your daughter, but I am not your property. My life is not for sale, not to be bargained, not to be locked away. If I survived the scorpion, it was to live with dignity, not to be shamed inside my own home." Her words echoed louder than any of Baraka's shouts. The villagers murmured, and the father's pride began to crumble. Not because he accepted the truth, but because he realized he could no longer silence her as before. The village, witnesses now to his tyranny, was beginning to see the difference between tradition and injustice. That night Baraka withdrew in silence, his fury still burning, but already marked by the weight of a coming defeat. Amara, though fearful of what was to come, knew something had changed. Her voice could no longer be silenced, and Cato, though threatened with expulsion, remained there, ready to face not just the venom of a scorpion, but the crueler poison, the pride of a father, too blind to see the truth. The next morning, the entire village awoke in a stir. The confrontation from the night before had not stayed confined within the mud walls of Baraka's home. Like a spark on dry straw, it spread quickly mouth to mouth, until no one could pretend not to know. The issue was no longer just a matter of one family's honor. It had become a question of truth for the entire community. Before the sun reached its peak, the villagers began gathering in the central square. There was no judge, no official council summoned, but everyone knew this gathering would be a trial. A trial without a judge, only witnesses. The men settled onto makeshift benches. The women clustered around baskets of vegetables they brought as excuses to be there. Children, curious and wide-eyed, ran around without fully grasping the weight of what was happening, but already sensing that something historic was unfolding. At the center stood Baraka, his face hard as stone. Amara, her eyes steady despite the weakness in her body, and Cato calm and upright, carrying no guilt. Baraka was the first to speak. His voice rang out high and full of bitterness. "This outsider dared to defy me to refuse the proposal I gave him, and to further stain the honor of my house. My daughter, who should have remained silent, stood against me in front of you all. I say this if tradition means anything to us. This man must leave the village, and my daughter must pay for her disrespect." Some nodded in agreement, but other voices soon rose. One of the village youths, remembering the day of the scorpion, said no one else dared go near Amara when the venom burned through her body. This man did. He risked his life for her. If she's breathing today, it's because he thought not of himself. How can he now be treated like a criminal? A sharp-tongued woman shouted back. And who's to say there wasn't something in it for him? No man does a favor without looking at what he can gain, but her accusation didn't go unchallenged. An older woman stood leaning on her cane, and spoke with the quiet force of someone who carries the weight of many years. Kindness isn't currency. It's a choice, and someone who rejects a lie has already done more for this village than those bowed to blind tradition. I didn't see this man ask for anything. I didn't see this man take anything. What I saw was courage. When all of us chose fear, silence fell over the square. Dot's simple words, but full of truth, carried more weight than Baraka's loudest accusations. Amara moved, let quiet tears slip from her eyes. Not from weakness, but from relief. Dot, for the first time, someone had spoken aloud which she had long felt, that her life was not a commodity, and her dignity could not be sold. Baraka tried to interrupt, but the crowd had already begun to murmur. Some called for Cato's exile. Others demanded justice for Amara. For the first time, the father's absolute power was being questioned openly. This trial without a judge showed what happens when authority exercised with tyranny loses its strength before a truth shared aloud. Cato, who had stood silently until then, stepped forward. His voice was calm. "I did not come to this village to bring division. I came in search of work, and I found a life that needed saving. I followed my heart, expecting nothing in return. If you want me gone, I will leave. But know this, I leave with no shame. Shame is letting a woman die on the ground out of fear of gossip. Shame is locking up your own daughter in the name of hollow pride. That shame I do not carry." His words, spoken without anger, rang like a verdict. The trial that should have condemned him instead exposed bar blindness. Many who had once supported the father, no longer had the courage to repeat his accusations. The crowd slowly dispersed in silence. Each person returned home with heavy thoughts. There was no judge, no official ruling, but everyone knew the truth had been spoken too loudly to be erased. And so the whole village bore witness that one man's power is not absolute when a community awakens. The trial without a judge became the moment when the masks fell and Baraka's tyranny began to lose its grip. The morning sun shone brighter than ever over. But inside Baraka's house, a heavy silence lingered. The man who had once stood tall as the unquestioned voice of honor now stayed hidden, unable to face the eyes of the village. The judgment without a judge the day before had left deep marks. He had shouted, threatened, demanded, but in the end his authority had been eroded by the weight of truth spoken in public. Amara, on the other hand, felt a new lightness in her chest, not because she was suddenly accepted by all, but because she no longer felt alone. Her voice had finally been heard, and the silence she had lived in for so long had been broken. When she stepped out her front door, the neighbors who once avoided her no longer looked away. Some still whispered it was true, but others nodded discreetly, as if recognizing courage, where they once saw shame in the village square. Thekle Potko had left still rested on a stone. Someone could have taken it, but it remained, a silent witness to a gesture no one could deny. Amara approached it, ran her hand over the rough surface, and felt that this object symbolized more than a life returned. It symbolized her freedom to choose, to speak, to exist without being reduced to a bargaining chip. That very day, she made a decision. She walked to the home of the village seamstress, a woman known for teaching young girls the skills to become independent. "I want to learn," Amara said firmly. The seamstress looked her in the eye and saw not just a student, but a woman fighting to rebuild her life. "My doors are open," she replied. And so Amara began to sew, not just fabric, but her own destiny. Kato, for his part, did not leave. He remained in the village working the fields, helping where needed, but always respecting Amara's space. There was no rush in his presence, no pressure, no expectations. He did not follow her like an owner, but stood nearby like a friend, a silent support. And that attitude, so different from what the village had expected, slowly began to earn respect. What was once seen as defiance was now recognized as dignity. Defeated in silence, withdrew from public life. He no longer raised his voice at community meetings, no longer walked with the same proud stride. His pride, once feared, was now just a memory, a relic of a power undone by the courage of a daughter and the truth of a stranger. Time passed and the village learned. People still whispered because tongues never fall completely silent. But the words of Kato and Amara's resolve became a reference for the younger ones. Some would say, "Remember the girl stung by the scorpion. Today, she sews cloth and sews back the respect they once tried to take from her." Others added, "And remember the outsider, everyone judged. He stayed not as master of anything, but as a brother to all." By the riverbank where Amara had once wept alone, she now sat with other women, teaching them stitches, sharing stories. Her life, nearly taken by the scorpion's venom and the venom of slander, had become a story of resistance. And when she looked toward the horizon, she no longer saw just a past of pain, but the hope of a future chosen by her own hands. Kata would sometimes pass by carrying wood or food, always discreet. A knowing smile exchanged between them spoke more than any promise ever could, because they both understood. Freedom doesn't come from broken chains. It comes from respected choices. And so, the village of Kibra kept that story as a lesson. The father lost his grip on the community. His honor became nothing more than wounded pride. The daughter, once seen as a victim, was remembered as the woman who faced injustice inside her own home. And the man who saved her earned respect, not for being a hero, but for refusing to turn kindness into ownership. In the end, everyone understood to save someone does not give you the right to claim their life, only their gratitude. Amara, who once carried the venom of a scorpion in her body and the venom of shame in her soul, was finally free of both. Because true healing did not come only from the hand that pulled her from death, but from the courage that rose within her to face life on her own terms. Time went on in Kibra, and just as always happens in villages, the dust of words eventually settled, but something essential had changed forever. What began with a scorpion's venom ended as a lesson etched into everyone's memory. A woman's life is not property, and a man's kindness should never be turned into a debt. Once a feared father lost the respect he had thought was his. There was no public exile, no physical punishment, but his image withered in the eyes of the community. He walked the streets, but no longer drew looks of reverence. Where once there had been fear, now there was only the memory of wounded pride. And in silence, Baraka began to live with his moral defeat. The harshest defeat of all, for it cannot be erased, not even by time. Amara, in contrast, blossomed. The young woman who once saw herself as a victim of venom and judgment was now recognized as a woman of courage. Her work as a seamstress became a symbol of renewal. Each stitch was like a scar turned into strength. Each piece of cloth sold at the market was proof that dignity cannot be torn away, not by whispers, nor by tyranny. The same women who once avoided her now sought out her services, and little by little, looks of disdain gave way to silent respect. Kato stayed in the village, never as an invader. His presence became part of daily life. He helped with harvests, carried water for the elders, repaired mud walls when the rains threatened to tear them down. He didn't seek applause, and for that very reason he earned it. The trust once denied to him was won not through force, but through the steady rhythm of quiet acts. The village came to understand too late that a man's true worth isn't in how loudly he demands, but in the humility with which he serves. And the clay pot, the one Cato had left in the yard as a symbol of life returned, remained resting in the village square for years. No one dared to break it. No one dared to take it. It became a silent reminder of the truth revealed before all. It was there that the younger ones would point when telling Amara's story. It was with that pot that a man showed that to save someone is not to buy their soul, but to give them back their right to live. Justice in this story did not come through punishment or blood. It came through the exposing of lies and the triumph of truth. It came through silence turned into voice. It came through the courage of a daughter who dared to stand up to her own father, and through the humility of a man who refused to profit from the good he had done. And so fate taught the village that there are two kinds of venom: theon that kills the body and the one that kills the soul. Amara survived both. The first was drawn out by Cato with courage and sacrifice. The second was defeated by Amara herself when she stood against the shame forced upon her when she chose to live with dignity instead of bowing to fear. The people at last learned a truth that would echo for generations. To save someone does not give you the right to own their life, only to be thanked for the gift. And true honor is not found in control or in domination, but in recognizing truth even when it reveals your own failures. Amara, once stung by a scorpion, was also stung by malice and injustice. But just as her body had healed, her soul found its way to freedom. And her story became known not only as a memory of pain, but as an example of reversal of moral justice, of symbolic relief. In that place, no one ever again called her dishonored. They called her Amara, the woman who overcame the venom. If this story touched your heart, let us know. Where you're watching from, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one.